Hello, 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 everybody. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. This is Mark Borstein, CTO at Tremolo Security, co-author, Kubernetes and Enterprise Guide, and my illustrious and infamous co-author, Scott Surovich. Scott, you want to say hi?
Infamous. I don't know. Yeah.
Infamous.
I guess I can take
I,
that.
I, I think we're going to go with infamous this week.
I've been called worse. I can appreciate that. And
You
hello,
know,
everybody.
I was hoping to start out this one with some weird AI generated music, but I still haven't quite worked that part out yet. But hey, wherever you are, please feel free to say hi. We love talking to folks. We love answering questions. So this week we're doing chapter 2, deploying Kubernetes on KinD. So LinkedIn user, unfortunately, I don't know who you are, but thank you for saying hi. And of course, I hope I'm saying this right. Sharath, thank you for saying hello. So last week we deployed Docker, and we're like, I don't know if we're going to be able to fill a half hour with running, installing Docker, and we had to get everything done before the end of the hour because we love to chat. So hello, Ahmed. Thank you for coming by, saying hello. And then we got Josie. I think that Josie or Jose. I do apologize if I get your name wrong, but thank you for coming by.
Yeah.
So okay, cool. So Scott, this chapter was your baby. What drove you to say we're going to use KinD as opposed to the 35 other ways to run a small cluster in a lab?
I was right. So it's Jose, making sure. So I was good on that one.
Jose,
Hey, I
do
work for a
apologize.
global company. So I use
That's on me. I should have noticed that one.
definitely get it.
I do apologize,
Oh,
Jose.
sure. So yeah. Let's go into that, Mark. Apologies. My cold is much better than last week for anybody that was on the call. My voice is, a little bit more normal. Still coughing a bit, so I apologize to anybody who has if it sneaks up and I cough in everybody's ear. So we go back to the first edition, right, Mark? We our first headache, honestly, when we said, cool, let's write this. Great. How do people follow what we're doing? Right, and you bat around the idea of go sign up for G Cloud, GCP credits. Go sign up for this. Go sign up for that. That's one way to do it. Not the easiest for everybody, though, right? And you might run out of credits.
It's expensive.
Yeah, you forget to turn things off. You have a billing account. Next thing you know, in a month and a half from now, you're cursing our names because you've got a bill. It's definitely a way to go.
What's that cartoon where you got two people sitting on a bench and one of them, has got the shopping cart and is clearly sleeping outside, and why are you homeless? Drugs, alcohol? No, I left an EC2 instance on. So we've all had that sticker shock at one point in our lives.
Yeah, I've definitely had it where I left the VPN connected. That's costing quite a few with the external IP down the line. So VMs came around as the idea. Granted, we could have done something like KVM. We batted around Vagrant, right, as a couple options, but KinD kind of came in, right, and saying, okay, well, why not look at this? And I'll always have a little bit of a limitation of them, right? But it gives you a really a full-featured kind of cluster feel. Pretty easy to do as well. In the book we only do one control plane, and we do one worker node. That's just based on resources. But for my own purposes, I've done 3 control plane nodes, 5 worker nodes. And we talk about this in the chapter, how you can customize certain things. Of course, there are some limitations. You start saying 5 nodes. Problem is, of course, you can't expose, say, 443 on all 5 of those nodes because they're using the same IP, so the socket's going to be used. There are ways around that by actually having multiple IPs on your box, and you can tie each pod to a different network to do that. But again, way out of the scope of what we're talking about. It's caused some discussions, right, Mark, as you know, over the years between the editions of why not go this way, why not go that way. It's kind of like walking into a comic store and saying, what's better, DC or Marvel, right? You want to start the discussion there. Everybody's got an opinion. So we've had good luck using it. Doesn't mean we don't change it potentially in the future, but it is nice, quick, easy. The scripting works. I use it a lot for my own development. I've got I'm going to say more non-ephemeral clusters, but if I'm going to test something quick, I use the scripts we created to spin something up fast to say, okay, cool. So the project also keeps moving a lot. If you're following, the Git on that, that the people that are always very helpful, I'm going to call out one right away, Ben the Elder. Is
Yep.
awesome when he's out there for help. No offense to the rest of the team, right? I just happen to have interacted with him many in the past. So the support's great. They keep adding.
Going to give a quick shout out to Alan from Virtual Book Club saying hello, and of course David Flanagan, aka Rocco, saying hi. Thanks for coming and joining.
Awesome. Yep, good to see everybody, or virtually see everybody, right? So yeah, I mean, probably there could be discussions for either using it or not using it, right, Mark? And it usually supports the new versions pretty quick. If they don't have an official image for, let's just say, 133, 134, 135, if it's coming out, you can use tools that they give you to, as long as you can get, the source code over on the Kubernetes and Git, and build your own container for the images, which we actually had to do when we were writing the 3rd edition of the book, because we wanted to use a newer version, but yet it wasn't officially released by the KinD team. So I tagged it, put it in my, in my Docker repo, and that's what I was using for the beginning of the book until they came out with one. Real easy to run it, to be honest. It builds it for you right from that source code.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I really enjoy about KinD versus other kind of micro distributions for testing, things like microkates and whatnot, is that really two things. One, it's literally just kubeadm running inside of a Docker container. And the worst kept dirty little secret about almost every enterprise Kubernetes distribution that you can buy is that it's kubeadm running inside of a container. I mean, outside of like Talos and maybe the cloud, the hyperscalers, but for the most part, it's okay. We're just going to run kubeadm, right? Because that's the universal installer. It started off as as an example of how to deploy Kubernetes, and it was like, well, yeah, this is an example, but it works fine. Why don't we just use it? And so that's one of the things I really like about KinD is it's a quick way to get kubeadm up and running without actually messing around with kubeadm, which, I mean, on its head isn't that big of a deal. But, you start dealing with swap space and patch levels, and it's a lot quicker way to go. And, we did look at, so like my personal development, when I do most of my development, I like to run single VM clusters, right? So I've got a Helm chart, Ansible playbook that I used to use with Ubuntu, where I'd fire up an Ubuntu VM, I'd point this playbook at it, and I had a single VM cluster, right, that I could just start working on. Now, I have recently changed that to now be Talos based. I did a live stream on this channel. It was the first one we did about messing around with Talos. I did actually get that working. So at some point, we're going to do a live stream just based on how to script Talos to start up, just for fun. But as much as I love Talos, the problem with Talos is for this book would have been, you can't get to those raw configuration parameters the way that you can with Kubernetes or with KinD, and we're not going to do it in this chapter, but like you get to chapters 6 and 7 where we start talking about authentication and audit logging. You got to be able to get to those parameters, and we didn't want you to have to say, oh, well, this is how you do it with microkates, or this is how you do it with what's the
Oh,
micro-K is
another
the one
one,
from
K3s.
Canonical. Well,
Yeah,
K3s. But
K0s.
what
Um,
K0s is another one. What's the mini Ks? That's the one I'm thinking.
oh, yeah,
Or
yeah.
mini Coupe. Mini
Or
Coupe.
Mini Coupe. Oh, yeah. So
Brain fart.
that's come up
Um,
in some questions from readers, right? And part of
yeah.
my problem with that is, and not so much a problem, right? But you want to add ingress, you can just do like Mini Coupe ingress and get it added, right? I'm like, no, I wanted to have the feel of you need to deploy things, no
Yeah.
shortcuts. Kind of, it makes it a little bit, and Mini Coupe's come a long way. At one time, it was kind of a pain with different CNIs. You can get some more limitations, but with the other reason I like KinD too is you want to do a multi-node, it will deploy HA proxy for you, as we talk about in the book. It's like, okay, well, great, now you don't have to do that. So a Docker container running that's going to do your load balancing, specifically for the control plane, right? And again, we talk about that in the book. They
Yeah.
don't give you one for the worker nodes, but you can add one. It's easy enough to do.
Real quick, everybody, I'm going to point out that our publisher Packet doesn't like making money apparently, so they've discounted the book again. I think it's like $41 right now on Amazon. So if you have not bought it yet, you do not have to buy it to have fun with this book. We do have a Git repo. Let me go ahead and put that in as a comment in here. But everything that we do, Scott and I were big proponents of community. We're big proponents of open source, because obviously none of this would have happened without open source. So we want to make sure we're giving back. So I'm going to post a comment here. I think that'll go to everything. Not entirely sure. And I'll go ahead and do a quick show. So you go to GitHub and you can get all the code, right? And I will say, like, Scott wrote the scripts that we're going to run today that gets that gets Kubernetes up and running. And it is not unusual for me if like I just need something really quick and I don't want to mess with standing up a VM or whatever, then I'm just like, all right, I'm just going to run the script, because I mean, he did a fantastic job getting these scripts to the point where like you just run it and it's not just Kube, right? It's Kube, it's Calico, it's and you're not running Canal, right? It's the full Calico.
It's full
Isn't it?
Calico. Yeah.
Yeah, it's full Calico. So it's not Canal, which is the combination of flannel and Calico. It's it's the ingress controller, right? So like that's all there, ready to go. Really the only limitation that it has is if you run it in a VM, you can't download the kube control configuration onto another box and access it remotely using your master config. But we'll cover this in a couple of weeks or a few weeks whenever we get to chapter 6. We handle that in the authentication chapter. So it really is a great way. Like, I just want to mess with something. Let's just get it up and running. And the really cool part is when you're all done, you just say KinD delete, the cluster goes away, and you can start over from scratch. Now, one thing I will point out is I have reached my Docker pull limit at times.
Yeah.
One of the things that might be cool to do is maybe see if there's a way that we can change the images so that they go against one of the mirrors. That might be something we can do.
Okay, we can also
At some
cache
point.
them on the local station as well, pull them pre. I thought about that. I actually started building a Docker registry that had them in there that I was going to have an export, and it just became a lot of work.
Yeah, it really is. And want to say bonjour to our friend Kafka, I think. Thank you for saying hello. Yeah. So last week we got Docker up and running, right? We had fun, right? We talked about Docker. We answered some questions about Docker. This chapter kind of follows that same mode where like you've written a script that automates everything, but you're also diving into some of the particulars here.
Yep.
One of the things that I find
Sorry,
really
Marcus.
interesting.
This is brought up, and
Oh,
yep, you can definitely do. It even tells you when you're doing kind, right? It says you want to do this beforehand. You can load up the images
yep.
into the kind node to make it faster. You'll even notice that if you were to run a kind delete and then launch it again, it does come up much faster, typically. But
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I really like about Kind and this particular feature is Kubo IDC proxy, the end-to-end tests use Kind to be able to automate the testing. And that's kind of the cool thing, is that it loads up Kind and then it pushes the image directly into Kind. So that way it's just going directly into can we use another Docker engine? Well, we'll answer the question in a second. To be able to speed your development. So it really is a nice little tool. So let's see, what do we got here? Jose is using Open Unison, but finds it confusing. I'm sorry to hear that. Hopefully we'll be able to dispel that. We aren't going to be talking Open Unison much today, though. We'll get into that with Chapter 6. And then Kafka, can we use other than Docker Engine to make up container images for Kate? What do you think about that one, Scott?
yeah, definitely. Lots of different options out there, right? As long as you get at the end of the day an OCI2 compliant image, right? I'm just gonna go back to what I mentioned last week. We were talking about OCI images.
Right.
I lost track of the tools. There used to be only a handful, of course. Now there's a ton, and I know, Mark, you do a lot with this, right? In different I mean, by far, I have to admit, Docker still is what I see used for the most part.
I honestly, I use Docker 99% of the time. I'm a very happy Docker desktop on Mac user. I find it a great tool. I do have Linux laptops that I use from time to time, and I gotta say, I've tried using Podman, and I've never gotten much. I've never been able to use it the way I wanted to. I always like the concept because I hate daemons. But in like CI/CD pipelines, right, you don't generally want to have to access that Docker daemon. So there are some great tools. Kaneko is a great one for building images without having a Docker daemon, just building it and pushing it. And we use that in Chapter 19 when we build out our platform. And then like in the Java world, if you're using like Grail or Maven to do your builds, Google's got a great project called Jib, Jib. Let's see if I can pull it up here. Google Jib. Yeah, here we go. So this is one that I use with Open Unison all the time. That's what we use to go ahead and publish our containers because they're all based on Java. So that's another good one. And while I'm at it, why don't I find out Kaneko? I believe it's Japanese word. Kaneko Docker. Google contain, also from Google.
Mm-hmm.
Post that one. There's the Kaneko, not Kaneko, Kaniko. So that's another great little tool for generating containers without having to use Docker itself. But like you said, Scott, as long as it's generating something that's OCI2, because like Red Hat doesn't even use Docker or Containerd or run C. It uses Cryo, which is completely different containerization technology.
Yep.
So great question. So we're about 20 minutes in. You want to start rolling out Docker? Anything else you want, or excuse me, KinD? Anything else you want to kind of bring up?
No, I know. I'd like to just kind of point out in the chapter, we run into this in all 3 editions, right? We have a boot camp chapter. Everybody might know from chapter 3. So when we developed the book, we didn't want to rehash. I don't want to say basics, right? Because even the basics in Kubernetes are challenging when you start. But we didn't want to have to say, here's a deployment. This is what it is. This is how you do this, right? We went right into, okay, there's enough books out there for that, whether it's, up and running or a slew of them now. So in chapters 2 and 3, we had some people saying, well, we don't know how to do this yet, or we don't know what this object is yet. In the first edition, we actually had the bootcamp before KinD, but then somebody mentioned, it's a chicken egg problem. Because when you're looking at the bootcamp, you might want to type in some of these commands and see things. Well, we didn't have KinD running yet. So I kind of like to point that out, that the 2 chapters kind of go hand in hand. We discuss objects in that, and we do that right away in this chapter on like page 25 in the PDF at least, where we're talking about the control plane, the nodes, terms like container, pod, deployment, storage classes, PVs, because we talk about those. So again, chicken egg. We bring up stuff CSI for storage because we have local path provisioner in KinD.
And what does CSI stand for, Scott?
The container storage interface. Think of it as your driver and connections to give you storage. Is the best way to think about it. So kind of like the CNI. We've talked about that a little bit last week, but not a lot because we were still on Docker. But similar to the CSI, you got the container network interface. So that's how you interact with storage, how you interact with the network. And I've always been a big storage fan on Kubernetes, right? Even before it was
I'm sorry,
popular.
Scott. Isn't it illegal to run stateful workloads on Kubernetes? Aren't the Kubernetes police going to come after me?
It's funny when people say stateless too, right? Because I'm always like, well, that's splitting hairs. My container is stateless, right? I'm putting the data somewhere else. It makes it stateful. We all know that, right? But it's databases, right? Huge one. I did a presentation in Detroit, KubeCon, with NetApp, right, for storage. And I was up there with Scotty from DreamWorks, and they are Kubernetes for other databases. So when people say that, right, Mark, I always go, oh boy, let me bring up some examples, right? Like DreamWorks, movies, not exactly small, right?
Yeah,
there's a lot of stuff going there, and that's what they do. So of course, I love the fact that KinD had that included. It just makes it easier to consume some storage. Because all the examples you see on the internet, when you find out GitHub for like Prometheus, whatever, it's all using really ephemeral for everything. So you reset your turn off your machine at night, you lost everything. So I kind of like having the storage where we can get back to it. We go through things about interacting with a cluster using stuff like kube control, right? kubectl, whatever you want to say. And that's where we deal with the beginning of the chapter, and that's when we get into KinD, right? We say, why KinD? We kind of already talked about that here. KinD was just kind of an easy, common thing that could be used, right? Because somebody said, why not WSL? Well, we could, but now, and this came up with some of the reviewers, right, Mark? People were like, well, why don't you have examples for running it on GKE, running it on AWS?
Right.
I'm like, oh my God, every chapter would be like quadruple.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'll say right now, if you're looking for a book that teaches you how to use GKE, go get a book that teaches you how to do GKE, because yes, it's Kubernetes, right? And same with EKS, AKS, any of the cloud hosted Kubernetes. Yes, it is Kubernetes, but you've got to figure out all of the cloud bits that go with it, right? So like, I'll pick on my friends on Amazon, right? EKS, you got to figure out IAM and how it interacts with, everything. And that is a 400 level course on its own, even forgetting how Kubernetes works, just how it interacts with the cloud and provisions resources. And that's not easy. Like it seems easy when I run, EKS control up and everything's just going. And I see a little smiley face from David here. But it seems easy until you dive into it and you're like, well, I need to do this a little bit differently. And like, I'm not picking on them and saying it's bad or whatever. Like, it just is, right? Because these are hard problems to solve. These are not, if these were easy problems to solve, nobody would be buying this book, right? So, while we do get into a lot of the integration side of Kubernetes in future chapters, this is a Kubernetes book. This is not a cloud management book. And so totally like go buy a book on GKE, go buy a book on EKS or AKS. Come home when you're ready to start diving into the intricacies of how Kubernetes interacts with other systems. Come back to us. But yeah, please, like, this is not a book about a particular cloud. It would be, 3,500 pages. We'd never be able to keep up. And, we would just lose our minds more than we already have.
It's challenging to keep those books, right? The Anthos in Action book that I helped co-author. By the time we published it,
anybody, sorry to interrupt, but I want to make
No.
sure people know what you're talking about. So Scott is a multi-book author. He was one of the named authors, because your name's on the front cover, from what I remember.
There is,
because there are like 10 people who wrote it, but you got your name on the front for Anthos in Action, which is Google's. Do they still call it Anthos? I feel like they rebranded it half a dozen times.
Like anything else, yeah, I'm sure it gets renamed.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
But so if you want to learn about how Anthos works, Google's Kubernetes, they call the cloud version Anthos too? Did they rebrand that?
Well, they still got GKE, but Anthos is the whole suite. You get Istio, you get ACM, you get Cloud Bill or Cloud Run, and down the line.
Right.
But
yeah. Yeah, go find that book from Manning. And because
Manning.
Packet doesn't actually pay us to run this podcast, I have no problem mentioning other publishers. And if there are other Kubernetes books that you want to recommend, I may or may not say okay and put the link up. So
there's some good ones out there. Yeah. But when we were writing that one, before it got published, just so everybody knows, you can imagine this, right? It took about a year and a half to get everything done. We rewrote chapters 3-4 times just because of updates.
Yeah.
It's very challenging to keep up with that. You should just keep an HTML format of the book and throw it somewhere because it's easier to update rather than trying to do these PDFs and publish.
I remember our book, vCluster, Loft, the people who make vCluster, released a brand new version like a week before we were supposed to publish. And I was like, Kermit hacking on the typewriter to make sure that we were up to date, because I didn't want to go live with the book and already it's all the examples are obsolete.
We did that with a couple of them.
Yeah, it definitely moves quick.
So Mark, on this, do you still have that VM from last week? Because you had Docker on it.
Yeah, I've got a VM ready to go. It's got Docker, it's got the code.
Awesome.
One of the other things I do want to point out about setting up Kubernetes these days manually is about a year ago, maybe a little less, Kubernetes project changed the way it published its packages. So if you get your packages from like Ubuntu or for Ubuntu or for Red Hat by adding the native package manager, it used to be that like other packages, like each version that came out just got added to the same package. But now each version has its own repo. So 1.30 has a distinct repo from 1.31, from 1.32. I think your scripts mostly use snaps for binaries just to make life easy.
Depends which binaries.
Just looking at the because you do run you also do run curl for like KinD.
So I'm pulling the binary direct, whereas like in the first edition we actually built it with Go, which is just not really required. It was kind of cool to see, but we do a snap for, is it just JQ? Not a lot, to be honest. And I'm actually just pulling up those as you're doing that as well, Mark.
So one of the things that I got feedback on was don't show the book when we're doing a demo because it covers up some stuff. So share
Good idea.
screen,
Yep.
and we want an entire screen. We're going to go here, share. All right. And then I'm going to hide this because nobody wants to see that. Okay, cool. So I'm going to clear here. Now, we're going to go into Kubernetes Enterprise Guide. So this is, I think I got the latest and greatest. Yep. So we've got all the different all the different chapters here. We already have Docker running. Oops, where's comment? There we go. Yes,
I think your prompt is kind of off the screen too, Mark. Just so you know.
Oh, yep, you are correct. There we go. Docker PS clear. Docker. So we've got Docker running already, and like you've got the explanation in here of like all the different things you're doing, but honestly, you just go to chapter 2.
Yep.
And I think it's just create cluster does everything, right?
It does, yeah. So it kind of calls to get Helm and everything else. So see in here, we've got the PVC test directory and even this thing called HA demo, which I kind of included it in the repo just so if you wanted to do multi-node, you could see it. It's nothing that we really focus on, but yeah, I mean, and quickly, like we like to do, I don't want to dwell on the code too much on this, right? But we always have our explanation of what everything that it's doing. Sometimes it has more explanation than others, but like Mark was saying, we get the KinD binary. Now we do hard code this, and the reason we did this was we didn't do this in the first edition. It caused us headaches, right? Because it was getting the latest build. Next thing you know, you got a manifest for Calico that doesn't work with the Kubernetes version, and it was causing us some issues in the Git, right? People were posting. So it's like that was I'm going to say dumb mistake on my part not to consider that. We learned from that.
Yeah.
So yeah, we would just install some tools, get kube control, right? Get Helm installed because we're going to be using that. JQ, we're using a couple of scripts, so we just kind of deploy that. And now you get into the bigger part, and you can see where there's some comments on here where explaining what we're doing, right? I'm getting this version. Actually, that has to be probably updated because we are creating a 130 image. When we started writing the book, I think we're on 128 was the latest.
Yeah.
And we wound up updating it before release to have as close as we can get to the latest at release time, right? Every 4 months, what can we do? So if you kind of scroll down a little bit from this, Mark, so I have a couple of examples in here, messy coding from me, just saying if you wanted to run 129, 128, 130, it's just a matter of specifying the kindest image. And you can see that in the dash image. So it's saying, yep, use 121, 129, 130. When 130 wasn't supported officially at the time, I used a different image. It was using one from my repo over in Docker Hub. It was Surovich/node 130. Of course, now it's official. So what we do from this is the KinD create cluster. All right, so we're passing a config. You don't have to pass a config, right? If you don't, you're just going to get a single node, and it's just I rarely ever do that. Okay, and one thing we didn't mention when Mark mentioned Calico, by default, KinD runs its own CNI. It's called KindNet. Nothing wrong with it. Works fine for testing, right? You're not going to see it in the wild, and that's why we don't use it, right? We wanted to have
it doesn't
a
support
CNI.
Network policies, right? Like it's basically like flannel.
Yeah,
right?
it's
no
pretty
network
limited.
Policies. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to have something, I should say we wanted to have something that was more what you're going to see in the real world. Granted, you might see Cilium even more today, and that does work with KinD. It's just we're using Calico.
Yeah.
So this will deploy it. Deploys pretty quick, right? You'll watch it all, and we're going to run it, right, Mark? So if you keep scrolling down, we simply do a label for ingress. Ingress rate equals true. We don't actually have to have that, but in our case, just in case we add it. talking about the Calico side of this. And you can see we're actually deploying from manifest in the Git. And again, if we use the latest from Tigera, well, it's going to cause us headaches, right? Because they upgrade, it may not support. They do an upgrade for 132, and we try to deploy it, and everybody's labs fail. So we do a lot of this. Take the manifest at the time, put them in ours. This way we can control them, and we upgrade them from time to time if we see a need to. So Calico uses an operator, hence we have it here, and then the custom resources that'll use the operators, and of course we deploy Nginx, the ingress Nginx from the Kubernetes SIG. This gets a little bit interesting. We use nip.io, and I think we kind of mentioned that in passing last week, Mark, but we needed to have a way to resolve host names, right? Or else ingress isn't going to be very beneficial to play with. There were a lot of different ways to do this. Unfortunately, nothing that made it easy for everybody.
Yeah.
So nip.io is the best one. In the second edition, we didn't have a lot of scripts that did this for you, but we do now. So nip.io takes your IP address of your host and uses it in all your names, right? And as you can see the example, it says sales.192.168.1.1 nip.io. So to get your IP, we kind of munge things together, right? So after it gets done running, it tells you all of your ingress rules will use, 192.168.1.1.nip.io. For people that are more, I'm going to say technical savvy, Linux, maybe some DNS, in our GitHub, we have an extra directory for DNS mask in case you ever wanted to. Now, the problem with using DNS mask is our scripts still go to nip.io.
Yeah.
Right. It's there for, again, somebody going beyond what they want. So you can have your own domain names and that. But so at the end, yeah, we'll output. I think if you scroll down a little bit more, Mark, it should be closer to the end. And it even says there, kind cluster information. There's your ingress domain. So you know what to do for the rest of the time.
Yep. And one thing to point out is that I did my development on Ubuntu VMs running in my lab. Scott, you did WSL, didn't you?
I did both.
Okay.
So WSL on the first edition a lot. Admittingly now, I do use Ubuntu VMs, to be honest, Mark. So it did work with WSL too. There was an issue with the older versions because of networking. Anybody that's been following that, obviously Microsoft's done a lot with it. It does work pretty well. We've had reports from people that say they've had no issues if they're using WSL with an Ubuntu-based WSL too.
And I think Carlos Santana from AWS gave us a patch for Linux Mint, I believe.
So I forget what he was using, but yeah, something we didn't do.
Yeah, so in theory, it should work on any Debian-based distro, but we only ever actually did, we did our testing on Ubuntu. I think we did 2204 this round.
Yeah,
right, so
so I've done it on 24, and I use a lot of our scripts, to be honest, in some bare metal I do. More for the Kubernetes stuff, right? Getting into something like MetaLB, right? It doesn't have to be.
So got a nice pro tip from our friend David to get rid of all of this stuff to make it a little easier to see everything. So thank you very much, David.
Yeah, awesome.
So I will keep that one in mind for future. Yeah, I've been using Linux for 23 years, and
too long.
Yeah. And like, I know how to get into Vim. I know how to get out of Vim. I know how to save. Right, a couple of commands. I swear, if I was better at Vim, I would have gotten better than a 62 on my CKD exam. Or no, 62, 61. You needed a 60 to pass. I had a 61. So take that, board. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's
So
actually
I would
do it.
just launch this. Yeah, because it's already the script's there. It's yep, create right
Cluster.
there. Awesome. Yep.
And off we go. So one thing that you do, Scott, that I really appreciate, because I don't do this, and people would probably like me more if I did. Well, probably not, to be honest. But breaking up the script with like the different prompt colors, so you can actually see that you're doing something new. Um, and then kind just is like, hey, we're gonna have all sorts of fun with Unicode. Um,
Yep. Yep. They do like that. And this comes from my. I got to be careful, right? I don't want to make it a 5-year-old birthday party napkin with lots of colors, right? Because you can get out of hand. It kind of takes me back to my old Commodore 64 ANSI BBS days where you really did colors, right? So I do like breaking it up. Um, whether it's annoying to some people, I'm hoping it's not, but it's easier to follow the output. And I try to keep the same standard, right? So you've got our text saying it's this, the commands are going to be this color. Um, hopefully people find it beneficial rather than just having commands in a shell script, right, that just execute and you see these things fly by and you don't know what you're looking at.
yeah. And one of the things that's important to note about Kubernetes in general is the
It's true.
this is a fair point. Um, it does look a lot like the Ansible output. Um, One of the things that's important to note about Kubernetes in general is that you can't schedule nodes until you have your CNI running. So if you're watching the node startup go by, you'll notice that first Calico had to get up and running. Once Calico got up and running, then DNS got up and running. Once DNS got up and running, now everything is schedulable. And
Yeah, and you notice it even more, right, Mark, without a script, because if you said to the kind like we do in our YAML, if you said don't install KindNet, yeah, you'll have things sitting in a pending state until you have
right.
CNI. Yep.
And then we've got a ingress. Well, actually, I don't think we actually have any
No
ingress.
ingress yet. No.
Let me see if I can remember. What
Do I have
we?
one in the
Oops.
chapter? I do have one in the chapter. Wait, or do
Oops.
I?
I was going to. I just got to remember the IP address. Is it 192.168.253.nip.io? Advanced proceed. Yeah. All right. So let me go ahead and. So if we do this, curl-v insecure, right? So that's the IP address of my server, of my VM inside of my network.
Mhm.
And then, it comes back with 404 because we don't have anything set up. But the point is that this is now an accessible cluster from my network, right? Like I can do the same thing on my local and it's going to work. Which means once we start getting into the later chapters where we have, we start doing this in chapter 4 in networking, where we're setting up the ingresses and whatnot. Where, okay, we want to test out, does the foo widget page come up? We it's really nice that you're able to run this and it works. Now,
Now,
it
one thing to show real
shouldn't.
fast, Mark, if you would,
Oh yeah,
do a
sure.
Docker PS.
Oh yeah, that's a great point.
So I think the call here is really that first one, right? So you see the node, the Kindness node running, and you'll see 80 and 443 obviously being exposed to it. So this is what is allowing you to do that curl you did, right? Because it's
Right.
going to hit your host, and of course, because you are now forwarding these ports on 80 and 443. And this is where I mentioned earlier in the beginning of the call, if everybody remembers, where I said, well, you can do, say, 3, 4, 5 nodes. That's great. But you can't expose 443 on more than one of those containers at this point. Again,
Right.
unless you do multiple IPs and set up different Docker networks, you could do that. I actually did have an extras in the old Git from the second edition where I explained all of that. It can get interesting if you're newer to networking. It depends. Not everybody has that networking background. I
You
come
say
from that old
interesting.
world.
I say cussing. And
There's more than one. She sent
yelling.
me a message in the first edition with weird things that were happening, especially when you get your different,
What?
CIDR ranges for your pods and your
Yep.
services, and they conflict with something else on your network and got other issues. But
And yeah, what do you call it in the chapter? The Russian dolls.
Russian nesting dolls, yeah, because of the way everything just gets, you got to go from this to forward it to this. And it definitely gets, it's like Inception too, right? It's like, okay, this is here to get to it. You got to go this way. And that's some of the limitations on something like a KinD, because your nodes and what you're running here is really two Ubuntu nodes that are running Kubernetes. You just don't
Yeah.
see it all, right? We talk more about that in the runtime chapter, because we'll talk about AppArmor, one of the Ubuntu's LSM, Linux security, that we use something called KubeArmor to do things. So we have to actually deploy AppArmor, because the newer images that KinD use, I think the old ones did include AppArmor. This happened while I was writing that chapter, by the way. The new versions didn't, so I started to run into issues. So I learned, and then we just simply add install an AppArmor to them. But so you can see in here, yep, our nodes are running. We got our worker. We've got our control plane node.
Yeah,
Right.
and the nice thing is that KinD, in addition, setting up the cluster, you can list cluster or
Get.
nope,
Yeah, I do it all the time.
Get.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So one of the things that I know that I can sometimes get frustrated with KinD CLI is that it is. I always feel like it's backwards. Like, it should be KinD clusters get, right? I'm doing operate. It should be the command, the thing I want to do operations on, and then the command. Whereas, it should be the noun, then the verb, and the KinD CLI is the verb and then the noun, which makes the go up, make a quick change, a little annoying, and if you've ever seen that cartoon of the dude sitting there sipping a soda, hitting the up button 25,000 times until he gets to LS. Yeah, that's me. So
I thought
I
it was
like
just me
being
that
able to
does
do
that sometimes.
that.
Eventually I
Yeah.
go, you know what, I can just type this faster. Just redo it. I mean, one thing too, when you did, if you do like the get pods, all on this, because you did that a little bit earlier too, but we were kind of mentioning that I really like the fact of KinD gives you an easy to use storage, right? And that's that local path provisioner there. It's actually from Rancher. So that's going to let us use PVCs. I mean, incredibly easy. You'll actually even see in the directory for chapter 2, I do have a PVC directory too. Yep. So there's a standard storage class, even saying Rancher local path.
So yep, PVC test.
Yeah, and this was just to create a PVC, right? Doesn't do anything special, but yeah, cool. So you can see, yep, it created a pod, it did this. I believe it's in the default namespace. I realize, you don't put stuff there, and we know this works right away because status is bound, right? So it created it, and if it didn't create it correctly, the pod would be crashing anyways too.
Right.
Right. So if you did get pod, you'll see that. We don't really. I've thought about a chapter on more on storage, but just no time, right? To be honest, and it does require more. I mean, as much as this is great, the local path provisioner, if I wanted to do more of a chapter on it, I have to run something like, say, I don't know, Longhorn, Ceph, something. But it's going to require more work, more machines.
Yeah,
it's going to be a lot more complex.
Storage is tough. I mean, it's very vendor specific. Like there's some high level concept. Like I know personally for me, kind of my like mind blown moment with Kubernetes was when I realized that all a storage provider really does at the end of the day is run a mount command on your node. Like that's all it does, and it makes it accessible to the container, to the process running in the container. But like that was like a moment for me that was just like, it's just a mount command. Like they got rid of it, but do you remember what were they called? Flex provisioners,
Oh yeah, yeah.
where you could use, and they've, I mean, this hasn't been available for at least 5 years, where all you had to do is specify a shell script and have that shell script provisioned onto every node. And you could have a custom provision. You could have a custom provisioner. Like I did this with a customer for SMB,
Yeah.
for SIP, for folks, Windows file shares to be able to access it from a node from inside of a pod. And I think I can hear David throwing up from here over in Scotland.
That's a key point, though, Mark, when you bring that up about people overanalyze it, right? If you're hitting, say, a NetApp filer, right, you just might try it. It's an NFS mount that just passes it. Now, but why is that a big thing? So I've run into this in the real world, right? Somebody wants to do an FS4, Kerberos, which of course is not really supported by default, but you could fake this. What you have to do really is still do the NFS mount at the host level.
Yeah.
But to do that, you need a privileged container because it has to do in a mount command. So
I'm pretty sure that's why they got rid of one of the reasons they got rid of Flex was because it was so easy to do things insecurely. Like you had to really be careful. Because like I know, like with that SMB example, we were using Kerberos, and so the mount did a K init with the user and a key tab, and made that accessible, and then did the mount using that key tab, and like it was really easy to do that wrong.
Definitely.
I think that's a big reason why they ended up getting rid of it, because CSI just had a lot better protections for that.
Yep. Agreed.
I
mean, when
really hairy with storage is like Talos. Like I love Talos, don't get me wrong, I love it. But when you start needing those additional binaries to get storage working, that's where it becomes interesting. And you really start to understand how processes interact with each other in a Kubernetes cluster.
Well, you'll see that with, say, something like Trident from NetApp, right? There's a requirement section beforehand, and it'll say, yep, you need open iSCSI if you're going to try to hit something like an ONTAP SAN or a SolidFire unit, or use something like even Portworx, because Portworx, when it goes east-west, is going to use NFS. So now you need NFS tools, and you may not have those in your distro. Or it might be next to impossible to get them on there due to dependency hell in something like Talos. There's just be so many things missing. You got to know when you're picking that flavor like Talos, you got to know what you're using it for.
Yeah.
Right. Because you're going to have those, I don't say limitations. They are limitations, but they may not affect you. Of course, I use a lot of storage even my home clusters. So it kind of limits me.
I think what might be a good idea around storage, even though we didn't do it in the book, is maybe we'll do a session or two on storage, right? Like the iSCSI one with Talos is a really fun one to do, because you really just got to roll up your sleeves and have some fun, and you get into like the difference between the dynamic provisioners, what that means, and the actual mount process, and you really see how Kubernetes does this. Because like I'm coming from the application side, like I'm just like, oh, I'll just give me some storage, whatever, right? And then somebody like Scott is screaming at me, no, I can't just give you storage because you want storage. It's magic, right? Like I don't need to know how this works.
Yeah, it just works.
It's just magic. So
I think so, Mark. We definitely
that would be a good fun.
Go on a tangent from just all the chapters, because it can help us build on them. What I'd like to close out with part of this for a minute call is at the end of the chapter, around page 49 of the PDF as an example, we get into, we use this in quite a few of the chapters, right? I say, okay, here's what you can do. We don't expect you to follow this exercise as per se, but what I do at the end of the chapter is I mention how you can deploy your own HA proxy Docker container
Mm,
and how
yep.
you configure it to be a load balancer. So say you wanted to make a 3-node KinD cluster. So by using HA proxy container in Docker, we're going to have that do your 40 ADM 443, and then that can forward to the Docker network
Right.
for the back end. So I go through the whole config. Now granted, HA proxy could easily be a couple chapters by itself, right? Because you're creating back ends, you're creating all your
And let's
health
back up a
checks.
second here, Scott. Why
Mhm.
would you run a load balancer in front of your API server?
Well, if you have more than one,
Right.
right? I mean, if because you got one target, right? So yeah, again, I do take for granted a lot. I've been in networking for a long time. This is like you were mumbling with H thing, Mark. I used to teach Novell. So anybody that knows has heard
Ooh,
of
what a
Novell.
blast from the past.
I was very young at the time, so like it does show
I've
that I'm
not
getting
heard that
older.
name in a long, long
No, no, I was in
time.
my I was like 22 teaching Novell, so I always take for granted networking. So yeah, of course your kube config file can have one API server to target for that cluster. So yeah, you put that load balancer in front of it. You want it for redundancy too, right? You always want to run
Yeah.
3. I've actually had people say, well, you're doing an enterprise book. Why don't you have 3 nodes for control plane? I'm like, okay, you're splitting hairs. Yeah, you should, but resources. And again, now we got to deploy HA proxy. Not everybody has a 64 gig laptop or desktop. Some do, some don't, right? We can start getting up to requiring 96 gigs.
Some of us like to run more than one Chrome tab.
Yeah, you tend to push yours. I've seen it, Mark. I can be pretty bad too, but so yeah, I mean, this is the KinD chapter, right? For everybody, it's powerful. Through the chapter, we go through some examples of the file. Like I said, at the end, we get into the HA proxy configuration, even getting into the GUI, right? The UI for HA proxy, so you can see your back end.
Right.
Pretty cool in my opinion to play with, but I'm a geek, right? So I kind of like seeing these things to say, okay, cool.
Yeah, and this is one of my favorite parts about KinD is when you're done. Bye-bye. Adios. Adios, muchacha. Because it's gone, right? Like,
But kind of like what Mark was saying, we since the script does deploy everything, right? I think you might get away with doing this maybe 7 times
I was gonna say
before
about half a
you're
dozen times, and
roughly.
then I'm like, Docker's like, you're done. We're cutting you off. You ain't gotta go home,
Yeah,
but you can't stay here.
that happened to me in the runtime chapter because
Yeah.
I was doing a lot of rebuilds on that. And incidentally, anybody reading that chapter, I was actually on a cruise working with Acunox and the open source team from KubeArmor on parts of that because I found some issues with Ubuntu and that. But yeah, I started to run out of Docker pulls, and I was like, oh my god, I got to pause now, which is a great problem to have when I'm on a cruise. I'm like, well, I'll be back in 9 hours, right? Because I got to wait till it comes up again.
Yeah, yeah. So we're probably gonna skip chapter 3 next week.
Agreed. I was going to ask that.
Yeah, like there's nothing in there that's really. It's a great pocket guide. Like O'Reilly used to do these pocket guides. I told Packet they should really do that with chapter 3. Scott goes into the detail that you need for objects. Like it's not the same level of detail that you get from the Kubernetes API docs online, but it's like, oh, that's actually the thing I need to know. I don't need to know what this feature does. I need to know what this stuff is. So it really is a great one. I go back to it all the time myself when I'm, well, these days, if I'm not asking ChatGPT just to do it for me because I'm lazy as hell.
Yeah, I like to write that when I was going right to the point, right? To say you're going to hear all those resources. Granted, you can go read a lot on them, but I tried to give you that, one paragraph of enough to be dangerous and know what it is. But
Right.
I go right to the point of like a deployment. When I would interview people for my team, honestly, if you read chapter 3, you could get through my interview, right? That's what I wanted to know. Do you know what a deployment creates? I mean, and what I want to hear is deployment creates replica set creates pod,
Right.
right? And some people say, why do you care? Well, it's easy. Your pod's not running. What do you go look at? Everybody says deployment. I'm like, maybe. What about the replica set? Especially if
Right.
OPA blocks it, right? Mark, we've talked
Yep.
about this because the replica set is
We
where you're
get
going to see
into
that
this
error.
in chapter 9. Yep.
Yeah. Yep.
I think it's chapter 9. Maybe it's 10.
Ever since we added more, I lost track of the numbers.
Yeah. I was actually looking at. I had to steal some code from our first edition, and I was looking. It's like, oh, we only had 14 chapters. How cute. But yeah, we're at the top of the hour, so I want to be mindful of everybody hanging out.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming and seeing us. And next week, can we start chapter 4? Are you're good with?
Yeah, I want to get
same
into
bad times,
services.
same bad channel?
I love services because they are often misunderstood.
Oh yeah.
Using correctly potentially, or somebody doesn't know how to use certain parts of them. We get into a lot in services. We had to break it up into 2 chapters. It got big, right? We'll even
And
cover.
I will say we're not going to cover the entire chapter in one live stream. We'll probably end up breaking it up into at least 2.
Well, one of the big demos I'd love to show, and I'll have to make sure I set this up. It'd be in chapter 5. Would be KGB.
The DNS one.
Yeah, external DNS
that's
and
a nice one.
KGB, because I'm a big fan of global load balancing, right? I mean, I gotta have. I need failover between clusters, right? And I want to automate it as much as possible. And the KGB project is just a stellar project. If anybody hasn't seen it or hasn't read chapter 5 yet, KGB, I think they're based out of South Africa. A bank had a problem and came up with it. I'll see if I can bring in Yuri as well from that project. I don't know about time differences. It's going to be part of the problem, but if not, I can cover that. But explain how it's going to get complex in a good way, right? Because we'll have to take a DNS edge case, forward it over to another DNS, core DNS, and down the line. But I think it'd be great to see the feedback from people.
And thanks, Marino, for saying hi.
Marino.
Always fun to have Marino come join. I will say that this is probably the last of the introductory chapters. Once we start getting into chapter 4, we're getting into some 400 level stuff. So to quote David. So I mean, this is like if you're brand new to Kubernetes and you've never used Kubernetes before, this might be a good time to take a break and go read something that is more introductory, to be honest. And not that we don't love you and we don't want you to come hang out with us, because we absolutely do. But we're getting down into the weeds next week with networking. And so we're going to be getting into much more advanced topics.
I mean, stuff that we'll explain quite a bit for everybody, yes. But
I mean, we'll still take our that's one of the reasons why we're not going to do a chapter, the entire chapter's worth of labs, because we want to take our time and talk through it. But yeah, so just as a programming note, I guess, we're going to start getting into the weeds. So yep, same bat time, same bat channel. Thank you, everybody, for showing up and saying hello, and to all of our commenters, thank you for saying hi. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your enemies. And if you have bought the book, I'm going to beg you, please go leave a review on Amazon if you liked it. If you didn't like it, you can skip that part.
That's what I always tell people, Mark. I say, if you don't like it, forget I wrote one.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, have a great day, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.